Good morning / afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Executive Speaker Series. We have the fortunate pleasure to have with us today Candi Castleberry Singleton, who, amongst other things, is the Vice President for Diversity, Strategic Partnerships, and Engagement at Twitter. She is the founder of the Dignity and Respect campaign. She is a Pepperdine alum, and she is here on her birthday. So I am impressed by all of those things, especially being here on your birthday. I turned 50 in a couple of weeks, and I will not be on any calls on my birthday. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much, Candi. So today we have about an hour to talk about a number of things. Many of them centered around the crazy times that we're living in, and really focusing in on this idea of your role as an executive, as well as this, diversity and inclusion environment that has really kind of bubbled to the surface of late. And so I guess what I thought I would do is, what I want to do is really stay out of the way. I want people to hear from you. But I thought I'd start out with just asking you a question. Would love to get you to talk to us about your career path and what led you here, and how Pepperdine fits into that career path.
Yeah, so I grew up in Los Angeles. I, like many students who wanted to get away from their parents, decided that I was going to go up north. So I went to Berkeley undergrad, where I became a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. That combination of being at Berkeley and being a part of the sorority got me really socially conscious in a way that I would say I've never been able to, nor wanted to, undo. There's something about Black sororities that and social action that, when paired together, particularly in unity with the sororities and the group of sororities, that really can have, I think, a dramatic impact on the world. I started my first job in sales and marketing, never with ever the intention of doing diversity work full time. And I took my first job in tech at Sun Microsystems, and I was asked to do the diversity job. Although I had been a business resource group leader for a number of years, when I took on the full-time job, I think I committed to doing it for 18 months, and here we are 15 years later, I'm still doing it. Pepperdine fit into my life. Shout out to EMBA 58. Pepperdine fit into my life because it allowed me to both have a career and a global experience, and to do that while I was working full time. And so here we are. I think in the recent years, my proudest experiences associated with Pepperdine was doing a commencement address as a distinguished alumni in December. And I think that has just opened doors for us, really, quite frankly, to deepen our relationship related to diversity and inclusion. This conversation and other conversations that I've had, I am grateful to see Pepperdine have the courage to take some of the stances that it has. I am grateful that you have stepped up as a person who's willing to lead the new Diversity Council. And I would just say this to you, because this is not a question that you could ask me that would lead me to say to this, is that I commend you for doing this on top of your day job. Because when I think about what it takes me to do this job every day, and this is my full-time job, for all people who are volunteering as leaders in communities and organizations and sororities and different projects that they're doing in nonprofits and diversity councils who don't have this as their day job, and they happen to be Black at a time after May 25th, we have put so much burden on Black people who are professional in this space, oftentimes because we haven't taken the steps that we needed to take before then. And so now we're depending on sole individuals to be the voice for an entire community, which isn't fair, isn't right, but is happening. And so I just want to say to you that if there's anything you need, if there's anything that the council needs, that I'm here not only as a Pepperdine alum, but also as a person who deeply cares about this work and has been embedded in it across industries, across geographies, across the world. And I am and I believe in diversity.
Wow. I appreciate that so very much. I think that is that's great to hear, and it means a lot. It means a lot, and we will certainly leverage that and take you up on that. Believe me, trust me.
Listen, I believe it, especially since when you offer something for free, people will tap into that resource as much as they can. So I am here.
That's right. That's right. Well, your phone might be blowing up before we even end the call. Since it's free, so. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You are welcome.
Yeah, and we have a great group. We have a bunch of people that are really interested in understanding and helping to move the needle forward. So that is fantastic. That actually leads me into some of the other things that I wanted to ask you, just to kind of have you elaborate on for the group. You know, we're seeing now diversity and inclusion is everywhere, right? It's the big thing right now. And so one of the struggles I have is everybody has their own definition of it. And so managing it, you have to try to understand where everybody is coming from, right? Because there are a lot of underrepresented groups. And so everybody comes with their underrepresented group top of mind. Yeah. And so I would ask you, how would you define, diversity and inclusion? What does it look like to you specifically?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I have to say is that, corporate America, and to some degree, I would say academia in the same sense, has defined safe words for the work of diversity and inclusion. And to some degree, with the best intentions of keeping out some conversations that have broken into the walls of corporate America today. With the best intentions of keeping that out, the way that it's come into corporate America has, quite frankly, I think, impacted corporate America in ways that they don't even know what to do right now. And they kept these things out. So we kept out conversations about systemic injustice. We kept out conversations, quite frankly, about race. For a long time, we kept out conversations about faith, the LGBTQIA community. We kept many of these things out of the walls of corporate America because the word diversity and inclusion, and more recently, belonging, were safe words. And they were words that really didn't mean anything to anybody, particularly the people who were doing the work. We just had to operate in the confines of what corporate America and what culture of corporate America could handle. After May 25th and the murder of George Floyd, and people deciding to stand in solidarity in the streets, suddenly corporate America could not avoid having these conversations because their very employees were the ones, and students were the ones in the streets. And so they literally start chipping into the walls of corporate America in a way that at some point the chips just came, the walls came down. And so all the things we've avoided talking about, now we're trying to accelerate conversations and accelerate awareness. So if you ask me what my definition of diversity is, I would tell you that I feel like diversity is, in corporate America, not mine, but how we define it, is the things that we can measure, right? And oftentimes, sadly, it is reduced to how many people we can count, often Black, Latinx, women who, by the way, have benefited most from all these diversity efforts, not women of color. And in recent days, I would say more progressive and aggressive organizations have started to include the LGBTQ community in ways that are all self-identification. The challenge with that is that if that becomes the goal, diversity becomes the goal, You don't actually create the environment that you're trying to create, because the goal can be achieved to some degree in people's minds with other people doing the work and them not doing anything. So it's somebody's goal, right, to create a more diverse environment. So somebody's going to find the students, somebody's going to find the employees, and I get to be who I am every day. A part of the reason that I created the Dignity and Respect campaign was because there is not a single definition for diversity. If you go from organization to organization, even across generations, you will find different perspectives on the validity, the importance, the value of diversity. And by the way, that also applies to inclusion, which also is more about the experience or the feeling that you have. And then belonging, quite frankly, was never really meant for those who have been underrepresented and targeted of diversity. Belonging was a way for us to bring other people into the conversations so they would feel good about the work of diversity and inclusion. That's my perspective. So a part of the reason that I created the Dignity and Respect campaign was because I was trying to find something that we all wanted, that wasn't about a metric, but about a feeling. And it wasn't about corporate America. It wasn't about a hospital system and patient care. It wasn't about an organization delivering a product or a service. It wasn't about a technology. It was about an experience that we all have the ability to impact in every single day, in every single thing that we do, in every interaction, and that's called respect. So if I ask all of you who are out there who can hear my voice that I can't see except in a chat, I'd ask you to raise your hand if you believe that you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. I've not gone a place where people don't raise their hand and say, yes, I deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And here then comes the biggest challenge. I'd ask you to raise your hand again and raise it high and proud if it is true that everyone I interact with, I treat with dignity and respect. From the barista to the person who cuts me off on the street on the way to to school or to work, to the person who takes care of my parents or my children, to the people who I interact with at school, whether they're professors or whether they're my peer students. They're in my sorority, they're in the opposing sorority, they're at the opposing school, they play an opposing sport. I can tell you this is where we fail, is that we as a community expect it, but the only way it's going to happen is if we're willing to give it. And quite frankly, this is where we teach our children every day the basics of dignity and respect. Say hello, say thank you, say please. And at some point over the course of our lives, I don't know where it stops, but it stops. And we stop. It's not that we stop doing it. We stop doing it consistently for all people who we interact with, who are of different economic backgrounds, who are of different social backgrounds, who pray to a different God or don't pray to a God at all, who are generationally or racially or ethnically different than us. And until we can fix that, then I can tell you we can set diversity goals, but the people who have to influence the goals, who have to do the work for the goals to be true and sustainable, are not the corporations. They're not the professors and the students alone. It's all of us together. And in order for us to do this, we have to shift from this being sort of a goal called diversity to an action that we all own. That, by the way, nobody has to tell us that it's a goal. Like, in order to come to Pepperdine, in order to work for Twitter, you have to be committed to diversity and inclusion. By the way, whether you raised your hand or not, what I can tell you is true. People know whether you're good at it or not. If you treat people with dignity and respect, people know it. And if you don't, people know it. And by the way, if nobody ever told you that you can do better at that, then you need to make some new friends, because we're not good at it at everything. So I give you a long-winded answer to the question, what is diversity and what does it mean to me? I would say diversity is actually easier than dignity and respect, because diversity is a goal oftentimes that is placed on the organization, and the organization doesn't necessarily transfer that goal to individuals. And yet inclusion is the experience that happens whether diversity exists or not, right? It is the result of diversity if it exists or not, as is belonging. But dignity and respect is something that even if Pepperdine never said this is a requirement for us to work together, whether Twitter said it's a requirement, we can own ourselves. And so what I would ask is that we think about what our contribution is to these conversations, not just hear them and listen, but what do you take away as your responsibility? It's not diversity, it's not inclusion, it's not belonging. It is actually your personal accountability is to treat people with respect. And by the way, then you can sit diversity and inclusion and belonging or whatever the next set of language that we create to make people feel comfortable is.
So I absolutely love that answer. I think that that's really, you put it in a new light, right? And I think that you get to the base that we need. And so I guess my next question, being a strategy guy, that is a strategic thing, right? But how do we get to it tactically, right? So for example, yesterday I'm in the grocery store, and with COVID, when you check out, there's a super long line, everybody's in, and there's one person saying, okay, register 7, register 9, you know.
Right.
And a lady just cut off about 30 of us in line and went immediately to the self-checkout. Like, didn't check to see if any of us 30 in the line wanted to use that, you know, the automated checkout. And it struck me, and I was like, wow, she literally cares about her and no one else, right? So to me, that respect falls into that very, very well, right? So she had no respect for the rest of us in line. How do we convince somebody like that who maybe is unaware, or even more so unwilling, like, I don't really care to be respect. Do we even waste our time with those individuals? So I'm curious about the tactics of instilling respect in people.
Yeah, I have to say that, you know, I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, today I will not treat anyone with dignity and respect. What I don't think we do is to wake up and say, today I will. What I can also tell you is that there are, and let me say, I have to get up every day believing this is true. So I don't know for a fact that it's true. I just have to live with this as a belief to do what I do every day, that there are more good people in the world than there are bad people.
Okay.
And what I have tried to do in the course of my life is to surround myself with the good people, and then try to think about ways of using those good people to influence other people who have a similar or like-minded thought about a thing, right? And so for me, sometimes I think that's where allyship comes in, because sometimes, quite frankly, to drive corporate change or to shift a culture or a work environment, it can't be done by me. Because when they see me, the Black woman, show up, they already expect this is what Candy's gonna say. And if anybody who knows me well, I know there is one person on this call who knows me well. I don't know if he's out there, Andrew Thomas. He is, I think, your director of communications at the school of business. So what I can tell you is, other than Andrew, right? What people who know me what you don't know about me is that I have lived an intersection of life, and I continue to do that, right? So I have friends, more than one, of all kinds of demographic groups, right? If you see me tweet, if you see me talk about a thing that's not necessarily about, you know, a particular situation that's happening, you'll see me talk about all kinds of things. Because I know, quite frankly, I see you, Andrew, I am not necessarily the one who's going to influence other people all the time. But I can influence people to influence other people, right? And so sometimes the answer isn't you solving the problem in the grocery store. Sometimes that is the job of the person in the grocery store to solve, right? But in other cases, if you worked at the grocery store, then perhaps it would be your responsibility. And I think sometimes we get in a lane that isn't ours to solve, right? So I would say, I would stay out of that, even though you should know. I have a feeling about it. I have a reaction to it. But the reaction to it may or may not solve, particularly in this climate. It will actually probably make me more angry, because there may be other people in the line who may side with her, and then it could escalate into something that's not necessary. So I think sometimes, particularly in that situation, I think it is someone else's problem to solve. And in an ideal world, like if we all lived in this space where we treat each other with dignity and respect, which is clearly not the case, then we could lean on that, right? We could say, hey, that wasn't a respectful move, right? But that's not where everybody is. So I say all that to say, sometimes it is somebody else's job to fix it. We can't fix everything. We have to try to pick our battles and the lanes in which we have the ability to influence either ourselves personally or by involving other people who have the ability to influence. And sometimes it's more sustainable and more impactful when we engage others as allies and accomplices in the effort to drive cultural change, or even in this case, getting the store to be an accomplice in solving that. Because the reality is that they are the ones who had to prevent that from happening in the store, not the people in the line itself. And I think that's when things get escalated and unfortunately go into a situation, or particularly if you as a Black man do it, it's a very different consequence than if you were not a Black person trying to solve that problem. Sadly.
No, you're absolutely right. And, you know, on that specific anecdote, I literally thought of doing my part and said, I don't want to be on the news as that guy.
Yes,
So,
yes,
so you're
yes.
absolutely right. And that's interesting. So, you know, I think about that, and I think about all the work that you do, which is unbelievable work. And the little bit that I am doing is wearing me out. It is taxing me, right? It is really, really hard. So I couldn't even imagine doing this as a full-time job. And so I'm curious, what inspires you? What gets you out of bed to be able to do this all day, every day?
I have to say that, and it's days like today, simply because it's my birthday, that I'm reminded of how many amazing people I have in my life. And I think because I surround myself by amazing people, I am reminded, right, of the importance of the work. I'm either reminded by a civil rights leader who has been on this fight long before, in some cases, at least their organizations before I was born. I'm reminded by my aging parents of the life that I wish they could have lived without the impact of racism and discrimination and social justice. I am reminded by young people that I see who are activating and engaging in conversations that are difficult to have, that quite frankly, corporate America never allowed them to have, but they mustered, you know, they bolstered up the courage and they banded together, and not necessarily liking all the approaches that we're taking in doing this, because what they're often asking is somebody like you or me to fix a problem that the organization often has had many requests to do, and often has resisted or stretched out the timeline. And so now you're in the middle of trying to help your organization at the same time as to respond at an accelerated rate the concerns that people have always had but never voiced. I think for me, the thing that motivates me is the combination of all those things. It's seeing that I'm not in it alone oftentimes, although many days I do feel like I am. The other is that I know who I'm doing it for. I know I'm doing it for the people who came before me and my parents, right? I know I'm doing it. I don't have children, but I know I'm doing it for my nieces and nephews who I hope don't have to have the same experiences that I see, observe, have experienced in the workplace. And I know I'm doing it for the thousands, it feels like, mentees that I have across the world from the organizations that I've worked and places that I've worked, who are trying to navigate corporate America and the politics of corporate America. And by the way, I say corporate America because that's where I live, but be clear, these same politics exist in academia, they exist in government, they exist and suppliers trying to become a vendor, all of these things where people who have not fully been committed to diversity act in their sort of organic behavioral way, in a way that isn't inclusive. And then because it's a combination sometimes of people doing that, the organization then doesn't feel inclusive. And so the thing that keeps me motivated is a little bit of change, a little bit of push, a little bit of pull, and that I am doing this, particularly at a time in this nation where I have sadly seen the most divisive, the most division, the most polarizing situations that either are happening on social media or happening in real life. And where I see some people, quite frankly, who have lived through 2020 and watching it uninterrupted, with the exception of they have to watch it from home. And that there are other people who have lost their lives, who are struggling, who are fighting, who are really trying to get through 2020. And so when you see this big economic divide, and you see this political divide, and you see a racial divide, all of these things make this work in this moment heavier. But it's days like today, when I literally woke up to hundreds of tweets, like almost text, and tweets and Facebook posts and IG posts that remind me you have a purpose. Get your ass up and make a difference in the world. And so sometimes it's those things in days like today that I'm reminded. The fact that I'm around you all, the fact that you invited me to tell a story that I didn't sort of, I didn't one day say this is my aspiration. It's just that something I've done has made me worthy of you listening to me today, right? And so it is that gives me the motivation and the encouragement and, quite frankly, the inspiration to do what I do.
That's fantastic. You said a couple of things that I wanted to jump in on, but I think I'll bubble them up into an overarching question that kind of goes back to your corporate career, right? And your path to senior leadership, that I think regardless of if you're working in diversity and inclusion or you're doing finance or whatever you're doing could be really important. And I'm curious about how you were able to successfully, successfully influence, engage with senior managers, right? Managing up is one of those critical things that helps us move up the career ladder. And I think that would be interesting to hear about your experiences overall, and specifically even at Twitter, right? That would be good to hear some of your experiences there. Yeah,
so now you're asking for secrets. A part of, I think, honestly, a part of doing this work, I used to teach a class at Carnegie Mellon University for about 5 years. And one of the things, which is a part of my practice of doing this work, is to help people learn how to make this work their work, right? So the interesting thing that I find about diversity is that it's the one thing organizations can say that they are committed to, and take 20 or 30 or 40 years, right, to make incremental progress. And this is when you know an organization isn't serious about it, right? And yet we, as who do this work, we sit in it and we try to just push it faster than the organization is really ready to go. And so the first thing I think is that you mentioned finance. You can pick finance, marketing, HR. There is no project that you will launch in any organization that you could say, I'll fix this in 20 years. I'll fix this in 10 years. And in this social media digital age, you don't even probably get like 3 years, right? You sometimes might even get 18 months. And yet this is the one thing that we could say, right? It's going to take a little time, right? Now, the other thing I would tell you about diversity, which is why I'm telling you this is about a people problem, and not necessarily about the word diversity itself. Because if I said diversify your financial portfolio, Nobody pushes back and says, well, diversity is not really that important, because we know the stocks go up and down, or 401ks, we got to move stuff around. And if you were like my grandmother, you didn't put all your money in the cigarette, in the, what do you call that those cans, what do you call those, coffee cans, or we don't even have those anymore, the Folgers can, or the cigarette, why do I keep wanting to say cigarette? She didn't even smoke. The cereal box, right? She literally had money, right, in the piggy bank, right? She had money in various places. So she diversified even her portfolio, even though she did not have sort of the traditional kinds of thinking that we all, I hope, have as Pepperdine students, right? Or employees or faculty, right? So when we say diversify, related to finance, it's not a problem. Even when we say product. Think about how many people had to diversify their product in the drop of the minute, literally, with COVID. We went immediately from offering in person to online everything, right? Literally everything. And so when I think about what I know humans are capable of, this is when I know we have not demonstrated an authentic commitment. Because if we can drop it and say, we're going to go in this different direction right now in this moment because we have to, then in the same way, if we decided to embrace diversity of people in that same way, it could happen. So you can diversify your product portfolio, you can diversify your financial portfolio. When it comes to people, it's going to take us 20 years. Now, the thing that I think that sometimes people think is that there is sort of like it's a zero-sum game. And I'm going to say it's not a zero-sum game. We have opportunities everywhere in our organizations to be more inclusive, and we choose not to. And that's why I taught the class at CMU. So the class basically would teach engineers, it would teach business majors. They were in B school, they were they were all graduate students. They worked at CMU. Like, what I'm going to teach you to do is to make this a part of the way you do work, not because I asked you to, but because you know how and you chose to. Right? And so their capstone project was, of course, through the whole course, at the capstone project was, this is how I am going to make diversity a part of my work, right? So first I tell you, the real action is, dignity and respect is something we can own. The second thing I will tell you is diversity and inclusion could be a part of your work, even if it's not your organizational goal. You can look around and see somebody's missing from this conversation. Now I would say, if you have the ability to see, you can do that, right? You also have enough data to suggest somebody's not included in this process. And whoever's in charge of the looking and who's ever in charge of the data, they have the ability to say something's not right, let's do something different. That's a choice we all get to make. And so for me, my strategy has always been about teaching people how to do this. So I could go to the next meeting, or I could go to the next, strategy or process, because I did this project in 2006 before many students were, and some people might not even been born, right? In 2006, and it was about moving from bolted on processes to built in. Right? Moving from diversity being a sidecar that has a little diversity budget and a little bitty team, to diversity being integrated into the way that the organization operates. And I'll give you an example. If you have a diversity recruiter in a very traditional sense, that person is responsible for finding the diverse people. So let's talk about who that is. The one diversity recruiter, and then you have in an organization, depending on the size, you might have 10 recruiters, 40 recruiters, 100 recruiters, and they might sit around the world. Now, let me tell you who the one diversity recruiter is for. Black people, Latinx people, people with some kind of disability that they're willing to self-identify, the LGBTQ community, women, the Asian community at a leadership level, because although they're fully represented in tech, in the workforce, they're not as represented in leadership, right? So now, who's left? Now you got one person responsible for that for the whole company. And then you got 10, 20, 50, or 100 people responsible for everybody else. Now, think about then how you're going to influence the workforce. If you got 50 people hiring people who are like them, and one person who's responsible for everything, first, that person can never scale to the amount of activity that happens in an organization. So that's first. I think the second is that if this person is actually teaching these 100 people how to do it, they can then be more effective. And that's how you move from being a bolted on one person responsible for the diversity part and everybody responsible for everything else, which often is everything except, in all fairness and candor, straight white guys. Because you might get swept up in some of the diversity efforts as a woman. You might get swept up in some of the diversity efforts even as a guy, right? Or depending on how you self-identify your own pronouns, you might get swept up in some area demographically of the work of diversity. And yet that's nobody else's responsibility. And as long as one person has that responsibility, that might be you, because you are the person responsible for the Diversity Council, then you have the answers and then you figure it out. So if we can't figure out how to take what you know how to do, and by the way, I'm just gonna say this, Black people, Latinx people, women of diverse backgrounds, intersectionally living people, people who are two or more races, the LGBTQIA community, people who have a different faith, they do not have some unique gene that allows them to learn about all these other people that we don't all have. If we are interested in learning about other cultures, it is available to us. What I can tell you is that if you happen to be one of those people I named, you've had to learn to live in Western culture. And Western culture has not taught anybody about you. So you've learned how to do it. That's how you know about you and other people. But until we all take that same responsibility, and that's the third action, right? So now I've told you dignity and respect is your individual responsibility. I've told you that we have to make this a part of our work. By the way, I'll come and teach that class for free at Pepperdine if it is necessary, so that you can't say that you don't know how to do it. And the third thing that I'm telling you is this, that if you want to know about other cultures, make the time to do it. Don't expect that it is Pepperdine's responsibility too. If you want to be a good leader, if you want to be a global leader, if you want to be an inclusive leader, then volunteer someplace, but making it a personal commitment, right? To learn about other people's cultures. Go volunteer. You don't have to even leave this country. This country has enough diverse people for you to learn about other countries, even in this country, right? Volunteer at a nonprofit. Make it a day of service. Take you and some of your friends and sometimes your family, because sometimes our family isn't the best influence on us and our commitment to inclusion and diversity. I'll leave that one there because that's not what I came to talk about. But I will tell you this, that you can volunteer, do some days of service and learn. You can get on a board, volunteer on a nonprofit board. You can start your own project. You can read. You can have a monthly night with your family where we're going to learn about other people. Oftentimes, there's even movies. By the way, I will tell you, Netflix and Prime and Hulu, all these places have now tried to lean in to diversity like everybody else. So there's enough information out there that there is no reason why you should not know other than you have chosen not to. So you asked the question, how do I embed it? I'm telling you, I encourage people to do the same thing. It's your own responsibility. Don't say that you didn't do it because Candi didn't tell you what to do. Number two, what Candi can tell you how to do is to embed it in your work process. And by the way, that's at the top of the organization. That is not at every level of the organization, because there's only sometimes me, sometimes the teams are 3 or 4 people. But the leader of each function, division, and school has to demonstrate their commitment, and they're the ones who have to ask for help. And when they ask for help, you build them a strategy that they are accountable for, not me. Because if I have to spend all my time with you, by the way, let me tell you what I also know. I know I can talk.
I love it.
This is what I also know. We're talking about smart people who lead stuff. We're not talking about people who've never learned. Like, think about the fact that I am where I am because I have had years of experience doing what I do, right? People who are leading a school, leading a department, leading a company, leading a nonprofit, leading community efforts, they are in those roles because they are often smart people who have accelerated into those roles. And of course, some of them got lucky, but that's a whole different conversation. I'm talking about the people who have the capability to learn. What I'm telling you is this, that it is not my responsibility to instill in you a commitment to learn about other people. And the same way that you've had to evolve the school to be competitive, the same way you've had to evolve your department to have competitive products, relevant services, and the same way that you have to evolve your company. The fact that diversity is not a part of that is a choice that you have made. Whether you admit it, whether you like it, the fact that diversity isn't included is because you haven't made the choice, because the reality is it's not like it's brand new. This isn't like some secret that only diversity and inclusion officers have been holding in their pockets and we're only keeping it to ourselves. In the same way that we had evolved technology, the same way that we have had to evolve our workplace practices, processes, and culture to accommodate, to include, the day that we decide that we want this to be a part of our work, and I'm gonna tell you all to watch this video. It's called Hearing Hands. You can Google it on YouTube. You will know that you have crossed over into that space, because the feeling of inclusion is recognizable. It's not just a number that you can count, but the feeling of inclusion. Watch Hearing Hands by Samsung. You can see it, because people who have traditionally been excluded, they are used to being in an environment where they're excluded. And we've learned to live with it. It is not even something that we are, in some cases, even advocating. If we work in a place that doesn't include us and we need a job, we're gonna stay there. But the moment that the place that decides to include us, we recognize it. It's not a surprise. It may be a surprise to you, but it is a surprise to us. It is definitely a surprise to us. So when you watch that video, if you want to know what it feels like when we've done a good thing, is watch that video and you'll see. The last thing I'll tell you is about Twitter. I think that we should not confuse Twitter, the platform, and Twitter, the company. Twitter, the company, is filled with employees who are trying to make the world better. I think Jack Dorsey, who has given $1 billion of his own personal money to COVID and related concerns as a result of COVID, he announced this. He also announced a commitment to girls and women in tech. What I can tell you is the platform is different from Jack and it's different from its employees. The platform is who society is. And what we've done is we put a mirror on how people really think and what people really want to say in the world, and they could hide behind a flower and a fake name or even create a hashtag to start a movement. And so what we have protected, right? Remember those walls of corporate America? Is that what we've tried to do is to never have these conversations. And what social media has done is open the door to those conversations. So now you can see very visibly what's happening outside of the safe space of corporate America. And what I can also tell you is we're going to be dependent on corporate America universities to step up and make safe spaces for people of different faiths, to make safe spaces for people of different sexual orientation, gender, and gender identity, and to make safe spaces for different people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. Because if we think that it's been hard up until this moment, we don't know what's coming.
Interesting. So that is an interesting.
A little joy. I'm gonna have a little joy. Keep going while you're asking.
That's an interesting perspective, because then it leads into, again, back into my strategy world, right? The long game. So I don't know. What do you see? What do you see the world, corporate America specifically, but what do you envision over the next maybe 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And I guess I'll back up and say, I asked that question because being a person of color, being a Black person, there have been moments throughout my life where we rise up and then we say, yeah, people are going to be on top of this for now, but it'll settle back into what it's been, right? And the murder of George Floyd seems like it's changed that. And so I'm curious to get your perspective. What do you see the future like?
Yeah, I think what social media has done, and I would recommend you watch two things. I don't live in conspiracy theories, but I also think it's important for us to understand the possibilities, even if you don't believe everything you see. So if when you watch The Great Hack, that was the beginning of understanding how data, which is now more valuable than oil, how data influenced the 2016 election and other activity, and how social media, now stories told by people who have worked at Twitter and Facebook and all kinds of different tech companies, but those are probably the ones that most people are aware of, how data and the use of data is going to continue to influence us in the world. So there's a couple of things. One is, I think that much of the conversation will shift from human organic behavior to conversations around AI and machine learning. Because think about who's programming. The people who we are still trying to get, right, to buy into diversity are the sources of data and research that feed algorithms, that feed AI, that feed then machine learning, which learns on itself from the algorithm and from the people who program the data that fed the algorithm. You know what I'm saying? So when you start to think about this as a conversation for what's next, I think it's important for us to be holding organizations as accountable as we try to do for the traditional work of workplace, marketplace, and workforce, and now holding to some ethical standard around how artificial intelligence will affect workplaces, and whether that is the people and how students get admitted into school, whether it is how candidates are sourced at the front end of a hiring cycle, whether it is patient and healthcare decisions that are made. The algorithms, in many cases, will be making decisions that humans have made for a long time. And if one human, does something that's not inclusive, you may not ever see it. But if that one human is a programmer, then the way you will see it is because it has impacted a significantly larger number of people simultaneously, likely. So I would say that bias in artificial intelligence and understanding the impact, I think creating ethical efforts. The challenge also is that the government has often been a place where we have depended, right, on a nonpartisan Supreme Court to make decisions that affect everybody in America. And by the time something gets to that, and whether that, if you think about sort of like, I imagine somebody knew that cancer was, that cigarettes caused cancer. And yet, by the time, look, think about how many years it took for us to, one, say that cancer was dangerous. That was the first thing. And then once we saw that it was dangerous, how long it took before people had the choice by law to enter into spaces or to be protected from spaces because the law required it. If we wait for the law to be the decision maker of what ethical standards are, you will already have impacted far many people, significantly larger numbers, by AI and machine learning than you can ever undo. And the challenge is, particularly for these groups that are underrepresented, there's not enough, right? This is where allyship comes in, right? And it's accomplished, also being an accomplice, because whether it's civil rights, human rights, LGBTQIA rights, women's rights, all of these required accomplices who didn't look like that demographic group, because that demographic group, the reason they're called minorities, right, which I don't like that word, but the reason that they are underrepresented minority groups is because they don't have power to influence their own situations in many cases. The laws, the people, local, state, national, and in corporate America and in schools. Like when you think about who are in power positions, without allyship and being accomplice, then oftentimes you don't really even get a fair shot, right? So if you think about the challenge, right, that as soon as people who don't understand, and by the way, in this case, this is not going to be about a demographic group, it's going to be about the digital divide, which is clearly, impacts some groups different. It'll be about those who don't understand tech, because right now, there's probably not a lot of people outside of tech talking about this. They're like the people who are being impacted by it and don't realize it, right? So when I tell you to watch the digital social dilemma, it's because it's the insight from the tech communities that's getting out into the world. It's like, okay, now we know it could potentially be dangerous or harmful or exclusive, right? But the time that it's going to take for us to undo it or to fix it, how many lives will have been impacted by this? And so when you talk about the next, and it's not even going to be 10 years, like this is happening fast. Like the thing that we know about, think about like companies who have to buy storage, and we all are experiencing it right now. Comcast was not prepared for us all to work from home. Spectrum is terrible. Like nobody, literally you could be on a call and I saw somebody say she's frozen, right? Like, I don't know if I'm frozen or you're frozen, right? Because quite frankly, none of the bandwidth was intended for all of us to be doing it at the same time, right? Some people work from home, some people work at work, right? So anyway, I say all that to say that technology or technological advances that don't have ethics, that don't have considerations for the impact of bias in data and research that feed the algorithms, and who are not paying attention to that which is already existing and the ability to manage people like puppets through information that they're given by playing games, by doing these little quizzes, by liking something that gives them some indication of what you like all of these things to me are the things that we're not talking about enough related to diversity and inclusion. We're talking about it in tech, but it's not a conversation that the general population is involved in. So I would say watch the social dilemma. And also in the same way that we have not paid attention and made a commitment to learning about others, this will be my fourth then request, right? Is that pay attention to what information you're giving to people about yourself. Because the information you give to people about yourself, the things you buy online, the cards you swipe in the credit card, or whether it's like the rewards that you have, all that data is telling people a story about you. And the people who will be impacted the most are going to be people who have the least amount of information about it. And by the way, are being perhaps influenced in ways, right, that they have never thought about. And that will be the biggest diversity challenge. It already exists today. It will just only be exacerbated in 3 to 5 to 10 years.
Fantastic, fantastic. That's great. You gave us some homework. So the Helping Hands by Samsung, the Great Hack, and the Social Dilemma are all 3 things that we should be taking away.
You should watch those things, but your 3 things are dignity and respect. By the way, I have a website. I haven't updated it since I joined Twitter. You can go download the 30 tips. You can take them home. There are things we know how to do. We just don't do consistently. Number 2 is you got to make this your own responsibility, right? This is not like something that you have to wait for Pepperdine to do or to get right. You can decide this today. You can make this a part of the work that you do. Because if you don't make it a part of your work, then your work is happening every day without that, which means you are potentially contributing to a problem, right? I would also say that it's important for you to do those things that I just mentioned related to watching those things, but also having a commitment to learning about other people's cultures, different from your own, and also learning about this whole sort of social media and the impact so that you are at least aware of what you're doing. I'm not telling you to stop doing it. Clearly, I work for Twitter, right? But I also think that it's important for us to be aware, right, of the harm that can come from it. The harm that we did not tell people about smoking. I'm telling you, there is harm that can come from social media. You heard it here. If you haven't already heard, I hope you know. But there is a lot of good things that come from social media. We just have to be able to figure out the balance and how to do it in a way. What Jack would tell you is that the Twitter that exists is not the Twitter that was ever intended. I could imagine, even if you think differently about Jack or Mark, or you think about the same things about them, I don't think either of them knew what the possibility was. But as these things grew, they learned about what the possibility was. And today we have to then manage those possibilities.
Fantastic. This was a great talk. It's unfortunate we're at the end of our time. We really don't have much more time. And there was a ton of questions that we couldn't really get to.
Some of them.
Yeah, you did get to some of them. And I'm glad you walked away with that takeaway of practical examples from your website that we can use to kind of instill dignity and respect. I think that is a huge takeaway as well. So because we don't have any more time, I just wanted to say again, Candi, thank you so much for doing this. Happy birthday to you. I tell you, I'm so impressed that you were doing this on your birthday. And hopefully we can bring you back to talk more. Once COVID ends and we're back on campus, I think there's a lot of students and faculty and staff that would love to have a face-to-face conversation and ask some questions. So hopefully we can get to that.
I am glad to do that, to navigate the hills of Pepperdine. I will just end with these words. I have these inscribed in my head, and anybody who knows me knows this is what I do. I have it on the wall, in one of the walls in my house, and it says, "We've been given each day to use as we will. We can waste it or use it for good. When tomorrow comes, this day, this time we spent together will be gone forever. And in its place will be the decisions, the interactions, and the things we left behind." I hope that there was something I left behind today that encourages you, regardless of what Pepperdine does, to just try to be a better human, because the world gets better as we get better together. So I thank you for listening to me. I thank you for inviting me. I look forward to seeing you all when this COVID thing is over, and I will make myself available as needed to support as I am Pepperdine proud.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You mentioned you have 1,000 mentees. Now you got at least 1,001. I've been calling you. So thank you again. Thanks everybody for attending, and hopefully you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.
All right. Take care, everybody. Be safe.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.